Most of the stuff you buy crosses the world by sea. But shipping containers don't just hold goods. They hold something else too: power. And China is all in. That's why they've been investing massively in ports all over the world. China probably has stakes in a port near you. They're creating a network. And it goes beyond trade. This is a story about promises, sprawling ambition, and a plan to dominate the seas. But let's start small. Let's go to Kribi in Cameroon. It's a coastal town known for its sandy beaches and fresh fish. Now it's also home to a deep-water seaport built by China just down the coast. This is what the coast by Kribi looked like on satellite images about 20 years ago. Not too much going on. In 2011, a Chinese state-owned construction company started building the port with the help of the Cameroonian government. You can see how quickly it pops up here, along with the highway that connects Kribi to the rest of the country. China invested over $1 billion to open the port in 2018. The idea, as outlined in this promotional video, to turn Kribi into a key trade hub for all of Central and West Africa. China promised fireworks. And locals say the port has certainly changed things here.
Le port de Kribi a évidemment bien apporté du développement.
Même les maisons sont chères, tout est cher vraiment ici.
Le port de Kribi, ça a amené beaucoup de développement puisqu'il y a eu beaucoup d'emplois, ça a boosté l'emploi.
And it isn't just Kribi and Cameroon. China's port promise is attractive for governments. They lend you money, you hire a Chinese state-owned construction firm, they quickly build you a port, and that connects you to global trade.
China very efficient in doing so because China has a strong state-owned enterprises. China very efficient, hard workers. And, so that's basically the Global South very need from China.
That's Wang Yue. He's director of the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University of China in Beijing and is a former Chinese diplomat.
Also, China needs those markets. I think that's a mutual benefit.
And in return, China promises not to get involved in your politics no matter what. By the way, China's involvement isn't the same in every port. For example, it can vary from 100% ownership to a minority stake. But the pitch has been successful in the Global South, especially in African countries. Out of around 160 ports that China has stakes in, 53 are on the African continent.
La Chine ne conditionne pas ses crédits avec des exigences telles que la démocratie, la bonne gouvernance ou encore les questions de genre ou la liberté sexuelle. La Chine, lorsqu'elle trouve ses intérêts, s'engage sans poser ces conditionnalités qui sont généralement faites par les pays occidentaux.
Another reason why African countries might be wary of Western investment is, well, the last few hundred years of Western colonialism.
实现现代化是世界各国不可剥夺的权利。西方现代化进程曾给广大发展中国家带来了深重苦难。
China still calls itself a developing country and says it's an equal partner, as opposed to the West. But China's deals with Global South countries still serve China's interests. Like in Kribi, because as we'll see, each of these ports is just one small part of a bigger strategy. Enter the Belt and Road Initiative. By building roads, railways, and seaports, China wants to connect the world in one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever conceived. When the Belt and Road Initiative launched in 2013, it was initially supposed to connect China and Europe, just like China's ancient Silk Road. Now, China is tapping into markets in the global south.
So we need to find a new market for China. And those countries also very eager to share their experience with Chinese modernization. Like a Chinese slogan goes, if you want to get rich, build a road.
Here's the network China has built up. The orange lines are overland routes. The blue lines are maritime routes. In the last few years, China has increasingly expanded the maritime part of the network. And that strategy makes sense, because remember, most traded goods cross the world by sea, more than 80%. These are the main routes they take. And these are some of the world's most vital choke points. Ships with goods important to world trade need to pass through here to get from one region to another. Now take another look at those ports. They give China pretty crucial access, which is important for the country as the world's biggest exporter.
The real question, to my mind, has to do with whether or not these infrastructure projects that leave China in as the lender, as the builder, as an owner, as an operator, accord them undue influence in foreign countries.
This is Isaac Carden. He's a China expert at the US-based Carnegie think tank. His research focuses on China's maritime power.
This use of economic coercion against trading partners, the threat or actuality of withholding certain trade, and the sort of control over the trading network itself helps give China a bunch of different mechanisms by which it can accomplish that.
Meaning, China has gained leverage over many countries. In 2022, China was accused of having used it in the UN Human Rights Council. There was a proposal to just talk about Chinese human rights violations against the country's Uyghur Muslim minority in internment camps. Here are the 47 countries in the council at the time. These countries said yes to talking. These countries said no. These abstained. Note that a lot of the African countries in the council voted no. China has invested in infrastructure projects in some of the countries that voted yes, and all of the countries that voted no. The proposal was rejected. Of course, it could have been a coincidence.
China influence increased because we lost investment to those countries. They even learn from China, learn Chinese, maybe they prefer more Chinese model. But that's their choice.
One thing is for sure, China's involvement in ports is cementing a global network with political allies and trade ties. Now that China has built that trade network, it's anxious to protect it. Let's look at one of those key choke points we mentioned before. This narrow strait between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula is called Bab el-Mandeb. The Suez Canal is on the other end of the Red Sea here. Around 12% of world trade usually passes through here. And you guessed it, China has a port here, in the small country of Djibouti. China also has its only official foreign naval base here, right next to the commercial port it has stakes in. China said the reason for opening a base in Djibouti is to secure trade from piracy. And it's not the only country with a military base in Djibouti. Take a look. By the way, the US base is around 13 kilometers from China's base. But we'll get to that rivalry later. So many countries have set up on the strait by Djibouti, in part because of attacks like these. Most recently, Houthi rebels from Yemen have been targeting commercial ships in the Red Sea. Those attacks have been so intense that they changed global trade routes. Many ships are now avoiding the Red Sea altogether and taking this much longer route to get to Europe. Along with Russia, China reportedly even struck a deal with the Houthis to avoid their ships being hit. The UN says disruptions to trade in general are increasing all over the world. A worry especially for the Chinese. The country is not only a big exporter, but also needs to import resources like oil and minerals to keep its economy running.
There is a risk to China of the disruption of that network, and that would really cause significant problems for their economic model.
And political rivalries could also lead to disruption.
There is this perception in China that they're vulnerable to U.S. sanctions, to U.S. naval interdiction, to other U.S. efforts alongside allies to essentially cut China out of the global trading system.
So it's no surprise that giant container vessels aren't the only ships from China showing up at these ports now. Meet the People's Liberation Army Navy, the PLAN. The Navy's official mission is to safeguard China's overseas interests. That includes securing trade.
Military not just means like war, rival, and military also means provide public goods, security public goods.
In the last few years, China has been massively building up its navy. China can now rival the US in some important military capabilities and already has a larger fleet if you only look at ship numbers. And it's building even more. Plus, there have been rumors about potential new naval bases beyond Djibouti for a while. The most likely spots for them are, you guessed it, some of the overseas ports China's involved in. The US research lab Aid Data found 8 ports that they think could become Chinese military bases within the next 5 years. Remember Kribi in Cameroon? Well, it's on the list. China's the port operator there. The port is deep enough to harbor big warships, and China and Cameroon are on good terms politically. And even without ports like Kribi officially becoming naval bases,
the People's Liberation Army has made quite extensive use of this network of port facilities. All of the ports and virtually any commercial port is intrinsically a dual use facility because naval ships need some of the same things that any commercial ship does, in particular fuel and water and food and the ability to rest their crews.
And there's more. The US is concerned Chinese involvement in ports could block or limit US commercial and military access to them. And that China is using ports to spy, like here at the port of Khalifa in the United Arab Emirates. US intelligence said a new planned terminal there was actually a secret military facility. Just to put the US accusations in context, China has one foreign military base, and the US has, well, see for yourself. The bigger the bubble in each country, the more US military bases there are there.
In the Chinese case, they're not at that level. They don't have anything resembling the US basing network, but what they have is an interesting alternative.
China says it has a different foreign policy. It says it doesn't intervene in other countries. But the ports certainly expand China's presence around the world.
The existence of this port network and the political relationships and political influence that's associated with it have really created a much more permissive international environment for Chinese military forces to be a kind of regular feature of some of these regional security environments where they didn't used to be present at all.
We don't know how the use of this port network will ultimately play out. The US is watching warily as China expands into what they perceive as their backyard in Latin America. One of the new ports, Chancay in Peru. It will supposedly slash shipping times between South America and Asia. A Chinese shipping company will be the sole operator of the port, which is why US officials have repeatedly voiced concern about the project. But China's port promise remains attractive around the world. As they expand their port network, they're gaining new allies willing to harbor their ambitions.